single corporate decision just pushed Donald Trump into full-blown rage mode. And here's why he cannot stop it. For years, the automotive industry followed an unspoken rule: stay out of politics, or at least never publicly challenge a president's economic policies. That rule just got shattered. Stellantis, one of the largest multinational automakers, made a bold and unprecedented move, openly defying Donald Trump's America First trade policies. This was not a subtle disagreement or a quiet corporate lobbying effort. Stellantis went all in. The company announced major plans to expand production outside the United States, setting up new operations in countries like Mexico and Egypt. But that was not all. Stellantis did something even more shocking. It publicly criticized the very trade policies Trump had built his political brand on. But why? Why did Stellantis risk everything for this move? The answer is bigger than just politics. Stellantis' billion-dollar gamble, and why it's a masterstroke. At first glance, it might seem like corporate suicide, yet Stellantis had a plan, and it was surprisingly brilliant. To understand why the company would openly challenge Donald Trump's economic policy while he is sitting in the White House, you have to look at the broader pressures reshaping the automotive industry. This was never about making a political statement. It was about survival in a sector undergoing an unprecedented transformation. Stellantis, like every other major automaker, is facing colossal stress on multiple fronts. The shift to electric vehicles, fierce global competition, and a marketplace riddled with uncertainty. Trump's America First approach demands that automakers keep production at home. But for Stellantis, that simply was not profitable. Operating costs in the United States were too high, and international rivals, especially in electric vehicle production, were rapidly expanding their footprints in countries like China. Instead of waiting to be cornered by future tariffs or supply bottlenecks, Stellantis made its move early. By investing in factories and partnerships abroad, it secured critical market positions before Trump could tighten trade restrictions. Think of it as a calculated chess game. Stellantis moved first, locking down key squares on the board while everyone else was still deciding which piece to move. Of course, the company knew this would unleash a political firestorm. Calling out the president's signature trade policy tends to do that. But Stellantis also understood something else. Trump's threats do not carry the same weight if the auto sector prepares for them in advance. The president, enraged by what he saw as an outright betrayal of American interests, struck back swiftly. Trump's explosive retaliation. Why it's not working. When Stellantis announced its expansion plans, the White House wasted no time lashing out. Trump took to speeches, social media, and press briefings to accuse Stellantis of undercutting American workers and betraying the country for profit. He demanded tough penalties, called for higher tariffs, and warned that any automaker moving production abroad would face economic consequences. Yet, automakers are not blinking. Over the last few years, they have broadened their supply chains, diversified their manufacturing bases, and pursued global markets to hedge against sudden tariffs or political turbulence, even at home. By spreading production across multiple regions, they reduce the leverage any single administration might hold over them. Trump's strategy loses further bite as more automakers adopt Stellantis' bold stance. If General Motors, Ford, and other major manufacturers follow suit, the White House would need to penalize almost the entire automotive sector to enforce America First. That level of confrontation seems unlikely to gain enough support from lawmakers or the public. In other words, Stellantis has effectively defanged Trump's threat. It is not that the president lacks the will to retaliate. He clearly does, but his economic weapons are weaker in a globalized market where companies can dodge restrictive policies with ease. To make matters worse for Trump, some of his own allies are now questioning whether his tactics are backfiring. If major automakers no longer see an advantage in keeping factories on American soil, can the White House truly compel them to stay? Or has Stellantis proven that, in today's international economy, no amount of political pressure can override fundamental financial realities? The worker rebellion, why this fight exposed Trump's biggest weakness. Trump built his brand on championing American workers, the leader who pledged to bring back jobs and take a stand against corporations that outsourced labor. Now, something unexpected is happening. The very workers who once cheered his economic promises are starting to doubt whether his approach truly serves their interests. This shift is coming from the people directly affected by these policies: assembly line operators, factory workers, and truck drivers who depend on a stable manufacturing sector. Stellantis' decision to lay off thousands of employees was devastating, but the underlying reasons for those layoffs fueled even more frustration. Instead of blaming Stellantis outright for moving jobs overseas, some workers see a bigger pattern, one that leads straight to the president's trade war policies. For years, tariffs on imported materials have raised production costs for American factories, leaving companies with three bleak choices: absorb the extra expenses, pass them on to consumers, or relocate production to stay competitive. Stellantis, like many others, opted to shift operations abroad. Now, the very policies meant to save American manufacturing are cited as a key factor in jobs disappearing. Workers from Stellantis plants have voiced anger not only at corporate leadership, but at the broader climate that led to these layoffs. Many recall promises of revitalized industry, new jobs, and rising wages, none of which materialized as expected. Instead, their communities are shrinking. Job security is eroding, and hopes for a manufacturing resurgence are fading. The anger is not purely economic, it is personal. A significant portion of these workers supported Trump, believing he would protect their livelihood. Today, they are wondering if they placed their faith in the wrong strategy. And it is not just workers feeling uneasy. The most surprising turn is unfolding among the labor unions, once unwavering allies of Trump's economic vision. Unions break ranks. Why they're abandoning Trump? This was the last thing Trump expected. Key union leaders distancing themselves at such a critical juncture. Throughout his presidency, he has portrayed himself as the champion of the working class, courting labor groups with pledges of tariffs and trade deals designed to keep manufacturing in the United States. Yet the very unions that once cautiously backed those policies are now openly questioning their true impact on American workers. The United Auto Workers, a formidable force in American labor, has begun shifting its stance in the face of widespread layoffs. In the earlier days of Trump's administration, the union either maintained a neutral position or offered guarded support, hopeful that tariffs and strong-arm negotiations might actually save factory jobs. However, the reality turned out differently. Factories in smaller cities are closing at alarming rates, and many of the lost positions are heading overseas. Union leaders have grown alarmed. How could a supposedly pro-worker policy lead to this many unemployed workers? One major factor is the rising cost of raw materials. Tariffs on steel, aluminum, and other essential imports have driven up production expenses for domestic manufacturers. Facing those higher costs, corporations often choose to shift operations abroad, where materials are cheaper and labor is more plentiful. This means American workers and their unions are left holding the bag. Rather than halting outsourcing, the tariffs seem to be accelerating it, prompting union members to wonder whether this approach has backfired. Beyond economics, there is a deeper sense of betrayal. Many union members feel that their struggles are used as political talking points, more than genuine concerns to be addressed. As factory floors empty out and local economies wither, some labor groups are now calling for more substantial investments in innovation and infrastructure. Moves, they say, would create real, lasting jobs. By contrast, temporary trade battles and punitive tariffs offer no such security. Stellantis' recent relocation, combined with the resulting layoffs, have put the situation under a glaring spotlight. For the first time, prominent unions are publicly stepping away from Trump's economic message. And this break with unions is not just a political embarrassment. It is creating ripples throughout the financial world. The stock market shock. Why investors are betting against Trump. To understand where the balance of power is shifting, simply follow the flow of money. Investors, the lifeblood of major industry, are already recalibrating their strategies, and the escalating clash between Stellantis and Trump may be the catalyst. What started as a dispute over jobs and production locations has evolved into a referendum on the future of American economic policy. And in the eyes of Wall Street, perception is everything. The moment Stellantis declared it would expand production beyond U.S. borders, the markets reacted. Savvy investors recognized this as a vote of no confidence in Trump's long-term economic plans. The message was clear: global competitiveness, not national protectionism, drives corporate decision-making. If an automaker with such a major presence in the United States believes success lies elsewhere, Wall Street takes note. Institutional investors are now moving funds away from businesses heavily tied to U.S.-based production. Instead, they favor companies that have diversified into multiple countries, firms agile enough to escape the turmoil of retaliatory tariffs and sudden policy shift. Stellantis' strategic expansion into regions like Mexico and Egypt appears less like a cost-cutting maneuver and more like a deliberate risk-proofing strategy. Investors are rewarding that foresight by supporting the company's shares, even as the White House rages against it. This shift goes far beyond the auto sector. Tech giants and retailers are rethinking their reliance on American manufacturing as well, noting the positive market response to Stellantis' globalized model. If corporations that embrace international growth are the ones thriving in today's climate, then clinging to a purely domestic approach risks falling behind. The implication is profound. The market currently values resilience in global operations over loyalty to any single country's policies. Trump, of course, is not one to retreat quietly. He sees his economic influence slipping, which pushes him to make ever bolder moves that some fear could shake not just the auto industry, but the entire global supply chain. Trump's desperate counterattack and why it's a massive gamble. Sensing momentum shifting away from his control, Trump is doubling down with one of the most extreme measures in his economic playbook: a new slate of aggressive tariffs. Unlike earlier rounds that primarily targeted foreign competitors, these new penalties take aim at companies like Stellantis for relocating jobs abroad. On paper, this strategy seems to reinforce the America First narrative, promising to safeguard domestic manufacturing by making foreign-made cars more expensive for American consumers. Yet the real-world consequences could be far more complicated. First, such tariffs will almost certainly elevate prices for everyday buyers. Higher import fees are not magically absorbed by the automakers. They get passed along through higher price tags at the dealership. For families already stretched thin, adding a tariff-based premium to the cost of a vehicle could be a devastating blow. It also risks stifling consumer demand at a time when the economy is under pressure from multiple angles. Second, the risk of retaliation is significant. Trading partners like Mexico, Canada, and the European Union have already signaled that they will not sit idly by. If the U.S. imposes harsh tariffs, they can respond in kind, hitting key American exports or imposing fees on other vital sectors, from agriculture to technology. A full-blown trade war threatens to drag in industries entirely unrelated to automotive production, magnifying the fallout. Finally, enforcement is an uphill battle in today's interconnected world. Companies like Stellantis are adept at reconfiguring supply chains, forging strategic partnerships, and exploiting trade agreements that allow them to skirt or minimize tariffs. Even if Trump ups the pressure, multinational corporations have the legal and logistical resources to dodge the bulk of the pain. It started as a standoff between Washington and a single automaker. But this conflict is swiftly crossing borders and industries, threatening to redraw the very landscape of global commerce. As companies, investors, unions, and consumers react, the question looming overhead is not just whether Trump can force Stellantis to buckle. It is whether any administration can truly compel multinational giants to play by one nation's rules in an age defined by worldwide competition. The global domino effect, how other countries are reacting. This was supposed to be a showdown between Stellantis and President Donald Trump, centered primarily around the fate of American manufacturing and the economic might of the Oval Office. Yet what began as a corporate decision to relocate certain production lines has swiftly escalated into a worldwide trade dispute with serious ramifications. The interplay of tariffs, incentives, and shifting trade alliances is no longer confined to the United States. Nations such as Mexico, Canada, and members of the European Union have positioned themselves as active participants. Their roles in this unfolding drama reveal a broader pattern. Countries are increasingly prepared to push back against the White House's economic edicts, especially when their own industries and labor forces are on the line. Mexico, for instance, has historically served as a cost-effective manufacturing hub, offering affordable labor and robust trade agreements that facilitate cross-border commerce with the United States. Despite Trump's repeated threats to impose steep tariffs on imports, Mexican officials have steadfastly refused to be intimidated. Instead, they have responded by doubling down on policies that lure automakers and parts suppliers south of the border. By expanding tax breaks, easing regulatory hurdles, and streamlining business operations, Mexico has positioned itself as an even more enticing alternative for companies like Stellantis. Consequently, rather than capitulating to American demands, Mexico is effectively countering Trump's ultimatum by boosting its own attractiveness to global investors. Canada finds itself in a somewhat more delicate position. given its long-standing close ties with the United States. Nonetheless, Canadian leaders have made it clear that they will not quietly accept tariffs or potential job losses caused by U.S. protectionism. Canadian officials have taken a proactive stance by offering expanded incentives for automakers to keep and even grow their production within Canadian borders. They have also been vocal in international forums, challenging the notion that unilateral American trade policies should dictate the course of North America's automotive sector. This approach signals a willingness to decouple Canadian industrial strategy from U.S. decision-making whenever such moves threaten the nation's economic stability. The European Union, home to Stellantis corporate headquarters, has chosen a more nuanced strategy. Recognizing Stellantis as one of Europe's industrial champions, EU leaders view this dispute as an opportunity to secure a more prominent role for European automakers in the global marketplace. By promoting incentives geared toward electric vehicle research and development, the European Union is providing Stellantis with a powerful economic cushion, encouraging the company to maintain significant operations within the continent. Additionally, European policymakers are working on bilateral and multilateral trade agreements that safeguard Stellantis and other regional industries from sudden disruptions that might stem from U.S.-imposed tariffs. This calculated approach cements the EU's position as a counterweight to American-centric economic policies. Collectively, these responses from Mexico, Canada, and Europe highlight a tectonic shift in global trade relations. Gone are the days when individual nations would scramble to appease the White House. Instead, they are forging alliances and enacting policies that actively undermine unilateral American interventions. For Stellantis, this realignment is particularly advantageous, as the automaker finds itself at the intersection of multiple supportive jurisdictions. Rather than being boxed into a corner by Trump's threats, Stellantis can pivot to international markets that welcome its investments and innovations. This not only diminishes the impact of U.S. tariffs, but also helps Stellantis establish a global footprint that is resilient to political headwinds. Yet, just when observers assumed Stellantis had already found the perfect strategy for weathering the storm, the company took further steps to consolidate its lead in this escalating standoff. Stellantis' secret strategy. While the world fixates on President Trump's fiery rhetoric and the perceived fragility of U.S.-based supply chains, Stellantis has been quietly reshaping its operations to flourish under any political climate. This approach is not about short-term adjustments, but a fundamental restructuring of how a multinational automaker should function in an era of trade unpredictability and evolving consumer demands. Through a combination of strategic facility placements, targeted research investments, and robust lobbying efforts, Stellantis is leaving little to chance. One of the most impactful components of Stellantis' strategy lies in its global production footprint. Instead of relying on a few core plants in tariff-vulnerable regions, the automaker has dispersed its factories across multiple countries, each benefiting from distinct trade agreements and economic conditions. By leveraging manufacturing hubs in Mexico for cost-effectiveness, Canada for stability, and Europe for advanced research in electric vehicles, Stellantis ensures that sudden trade disputes or political shifts in Washington cannot cripple its entire operation. This decentralized approach allows Stellantis to shift production seamlessly across borders, minimizing risk and maintaining operational flexibility. Equally important is Stellantis' aggressive push into electric vehicle (EV) technology. Governments worldwide, especially in Europe, are offering lucrative incentives to automakers investing in zero-emission transportation. Stellantis capitalized on this trend early by pouring resources into next-generation battery systems, autonomous driving platforms, and energy-efficient manufacturing techniques. This not only aligns the company with global environmental policies, but also future-proofs its product line against regulatory crackdowns on traditional combustion engines. As other automakers scramble to transition, Stellantis has already positioned itself as a leader in the new automotive landscape. Another cornerstone of Stellantis' resilience is its proactive engagement in trade policy. Instead of reacting to the White House's trade moves, Stellantis actively lobbies lawmakers and trade officials across multiple continents. The company pushes for exemptions, negotiates agreements that protect its global supply chain, and ensures its voice is heard in the drafting of new trade policies. This is not just corporate lobbying, it is a strategic effort to shape the global automotive trade environment in Stellantis' favor. By securing favorable regulations, The automaker safeguards its ability to operate across international markets, regardless of U.S. protectionist measures. But as Stellantis secures its future, what does this global shift mean for the workers on the ground? The answer is far more complicated. The human cost of Stellantis' global strategy. For corporate executives and investors, Stellantis' strategy is a triumph of globalization. But for factory workers in the United States and other countries, the story is more nuanced. While Stellantis has ensured its survival by decentralizing production, this also means that workers in traditional manufacturing hubs face an uncertain future. One of the immediate effects of Stellantis' global expansion has been the shifting of jobs to locations with lower labor costs. Mexico, for example, has become a key player in Stellantis' production network, offering cheaper wages and a favorable trade environment. While this benefits the company's bottom line, it raises concerns about job security for workers in the United States and Canada, where labor costs are higher. The question for many is whether Stellantis' strategic maneuvering will lead to job losses or simply a redistribution of roles across different regions. Beyond job security, there is also the issue of working conditions. While Stellantis operates under strict labor regulations in Europe and North America, some of its global suppliers are in regions where worker protections are weaker. Reports of exploitative labor practices in certain manufacturing sectors raise ethical concerns about the true cost of Stellantis' affordability and efficiency. Yet for all the challenges, there are opportunities. Stellantis' heavy investment in electric vehicle technology means that new jobs are being created in research, software development, and battery production. The shift from combustion engines to electric drivetrains will require retraining for many workers, but those who adapt to the changing industry landscape may find new, high-paying roles in the EV sector. However, this transition is not happening at the same pace everywhere. In regions where Stellantis is doubling down on electric vehicle production, such as France and Germany, workers may see more stability and job growth. But in locations dependent on traditional vehicle manufacturing, the shift could result in layoffs before new opportunities emerge. The speed at which governments and companies can retrain workers will determine how painful this transition will be. The reality is that Stellantis, like all multinational corporations, is prioritizing efficiency and profitability. While its global strategy secures its dominance in the auto industry, it also exposes the fragility of a workforce dependent on outdated manufacturing models. The question is not just whether Stellantis can navigate trade wars, it is whether it can do so without leaving thousands of workers behind. But beyond politics, what does this mean for the workers caught in the middle of this battle? That's where things get even more complicated. What happens to American jobs now? If outsourcing is inevitable, where does that leave the workers? For decades, well-paid factory jobs provided the backbone of America's middle class. But now, as multinational giants move production to lower-cost regions and automation replaces entire assembly lines, millions of people face a future where stable manufacturing work seems to be disappearing. The Stellantis crisis is just one example in a larger story. Global companies have no obligation to remain confined to one nation's borders. They can relocate wherever labor is cheaper and regulations are more lenient. Even if the United States passes strict tariffs, multinational firms will adapt supply chains to minimize financial hits. The truth is that no single country can fully control these corporate decisions in a hyper-connected world. For American workers, this reality can feel harsh. Once secure jobs that required years of specialized skill are vanishing. Entire communities built around factory wages are struggling to keep local economies afloat. Shops close down, property values drop, and families that once relied on a steady paycheck now scramble for uncertain contract work. That does not mean there are zero opportunities. The job market is evolving, and new roles are emerging in fields like renewable energy, artificial intelligence, and electric vehicles. For those willing to reskill, doors can open in sectors that did not exist a few years ago. Still, the transition demands significant support, from large-scale retraining programs to government subsidies that help workers adapt to cutting-edge industries. This creates a crossroads for policymakers and corporations alike. Should they direct substantial funds into training workers for tech-driven jobs, or try to penalize companies that shift operations overseas? Some leaders argue the only solution is to invest in research and development, boosting innovation so that new industries, rather than old-school manufacturing, drive the economy. Others propose heavier tariffs and regulations, hoping to force corporations to keep more jobs on U.S. soil. Beneath all these debates lies an emotional undercurrent. Factory jobs have long symbolized American strength and prosperity. Their decline is not just an economic shift, it is a cultural one that leaves many feeling betrayed. Yet, while traditional roles fade, emerging technologies bring fresh possibilities. The urgent question is whether displaced factory workers can feasibly transition into the innovative sectors quickly rising to prominence. Ultimately, Stellantis' strategy may be the new norm. If more companies choose to locate production wherever it is financially advantageous, how much influence does any sitting president, Trump or a challenger, really have? There is no denying that Stellantis' bold decision has done more than rattle a few cages in Washington. It has forced a national conversation about how far corporate freedom should extend when it collides with presidential authority. And don't forget that at the heart of this conflict are the jobs, families, and communities caught in the crossfire, each hoping for a solution that balances economic vitality with the promise of fair employment. Will global competition continue to drive production overseas? Or can new policies keep factories open on American soil? Let us know what you think. Drop a comment below, and if you found this discussion helpful, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more updates. Your input keeps the conversation going. Be part of the change. Because in a time of rapid transformation, every voice has the power to shape tomorrow.